Chaos doesn't surprise me. It reveals where the fault lines already were. Every storm, every tremor, they all follow patterns. And patterns can be used.
Richard Stone didn't cause natural disasters. He just made sure to profit from everyone. His charity, Emergency Response International, was always first on the scene. Hurricane relief, earthquake aid, tsunami recovery, the humanitarian organization that appeared whenever tragedy struck. But Richard had a secret advantage. He knew about disasters before they happened. His network included meteorologists who sold weather data, seismologists who leaked earthquake predictions, government officials who shared classified intelligence. Richard would position his resources in advance, moving supplies before disasters struck, establishing operations near future ground zeros, preparing for tragedies that hadn't happened yet. When disaster hit, emergency response was ready. First responders who arrived suspiciously fast, relief supplies that were perfectly positioned, aid operations that seemed almost prophetic. The media loved the story. Miracle charity saves the day. Heroic organization defies impossible odds. Emergency response performs another miracle. Celebrity donors lined up to support the miracle workers. A-list actors writing massive checks, musicians organizing benefit concerts, athletes donating their prize money. But Richard's aid came with strings attached. Disaster victims had to sign over property rights. Relief required joining his organization. Food and shelter cost their freedom. The charity became a colonization operation, taking over communities destroyed by disasters, converting victims into virtual slaves, building an empire on human suffering. Richard's settlements were perfectly designed, self-sufficient communities that generated profit, captive populations that worked for nothing, disasters that created opportunities. The celebrities thought they were funding rescue operations. They were actually financing modern slavery, while Richard built a global empire on tragedy. Tuesday, September 14th, 2004. 3:47 a.m. Richard Stone's phone buzzes in his Manhattan penthouse, while Hurricane Ivan churns through the Caribbean like nature's own wrecking ball. Most folks would be fast asleep, but Richard isn't most folks. He's got a desperate meteorologist on his payroll who's about to commit treason for 30 grand in cash. "It's heading straight for Pensacola," whispers Dr. Marcus Webb, his voice shaking like a leaf in a tornado. "Category 4, maybe stronger. You've got 72 hours, tops." Richard hangs up without a thank you. He doesn't need pleasantries with Webb. The broken scientist has been feeding him classified weather data for 3 years now. Their arrangement is beautifully simple. Government secrets for cold, hard cash. But here's what makes this phone call different from all the others. Richard Stone isn't just preparing to help hurricane victims. He's preparing to own them. Within minutes, Richard's hunched over his laptop, studying satellite images that won't hit the evening news for another 6 hours. The hurricane's eye is tightening like a noose around someone's neck. Wind speeds climbing like a rocket ship. This isn't just going to be bad. It's going to be absolutely catastrophic. And Richard Stone is going to make a bloody fortune from every ounce of human misery. He grabs his secure phone and starts dialing like a man possessed. First call to logistics. Get 40 trucks loaded with supplies rolling toward Alabama before sunrise. Second call to media. Start writing the press releases. We're about to perform another miracle. The most important call goes to Jennifer Martinez, his razor-sharp operations manager in Miami. "Jennifer, love. Time to execute Protocol 7. Protocol 7 doesn't exist on any paperwork. It's not filed in any government office or written in any manual. It's Richard Stone's secret recipe for turning human tragedy into pure profit, and it's about to swing into terrifying action. Because because while everyone else scrambles to prepare for Hurricane Ivan's arrival, Richard's been ready for 3 bloody days already. His supply trucks are loaded like military convoys. His teams are positioned like chess pieces across the Gulf Coast. His media spin is locked, loaded, and ready to fire. The only question now, how much human suffering can he convert into his personal gold mine? Based on those satellite images flickering across his computer screen, showing a monster storm about to tear the Gulf Coast apart like tissue paper, Richard Stone is staring at the biggest payday of his twisted career. But there's something Richard doesn't know. Something that could bring his entire empire crashing down faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. And it's headed straight for him. Before we get started, each of our episodes is original and uniquely crafted to ensure you never get bored. We've launched this show with a focus on sharp, original storytelling. And as more viewers join us, you'll see everything level up. Visuals, sound design, pacing, and production quality. The bigger the audience, the bolder the stories we can tell. So if you want to support us and continue seeing more episodes, subscribe and turn on the notification bell now. You're about to enter a world where money isn't just power. It's the most powerful motive. 3 years earlier. Monday, March 18th, 2001, 11:30 p.m. Dr. Marcus Webb's hands tremble like autumn leaves as he stares at the foreclosure notice that's about to destroy his life. 48 hours. That's all he's got before the bank seizes his Miami home. His wife thinks they're financially secure. His kids have no bloody clue. Nobody knows that the respected National Weather Service scientist is drowning in gambling debts and terrible life choices. The seedy bar reeks of stale beer and broken dreams when Richard Stone slides into the cracked vinyl booth across from him like a predator who's found wounded prey. Webb's never seen this man before, but somehow Richard knows everything. The underground poker games, the dog track visits, the bounced checks piling up like autumn leaves. "You track hurricanes for a living," Richard says, smooth as aged whiskey. "I help folks survive them. Seems like natural partners, wouldn't you say?" Webb's coffee has gone stone cold, but his hands shake too violently to lift the cup anyway. "I don't know what you're getting at, mate." Richard slides a thick manila envelope across the scarred wooden table, like he's dealing cards. Inside are photographs that make Webb's stomach drop into his shoes. Webb at the racetrack, Webb in backroom gambling dens, Webb writing checks he knows will bounce to the moon. "I'm not here to judge your choices, Marcus." Richard's voice flows like honey over broken glass. "I'm here to offer you salvation. $30,000. Cash money. All I need is one quick phone call when you spot something interesting on those weather maps." The money would solve everything. Pay the mortgage, clear the gambling debts, give Webb a chance to start fresh like a newborn baby. "That's classified government information," Webb whispers, the words barely audible over the bar's drunken chatter. "Information that saves innocent lives," Richard replies, his tone reasonable as a Sunday sermon. "Information that helps me position emergency supplies exactly where desperate families need them most. Makes me look like a proper hero instead of another useless charity showing up 3 days late with soggy sandwiches." Webb knows he should walk away, should report this dodgy conversation to his supervisors, knows what Richard's proposing could end his career and land him in federal prison for the rest of his natural life. But that foreclosure notice burns like fire in his jacket pocket, and his wife still doesn't know they're about to lose everything. "Just weather predictions," Webb says quietly, his voice cracking like ice under pressure. "Nothing else." "Nothing else," Richard agrees, his smile sharp as a butcher's knife. Dr. Marcus Webb reaches across that sticky table and takes the envelope with trembling fingers. He doesn't realize it yet, but he's just become the first domino in Richard Stone's empire of exploitation. The first crack in a dam that will eventually burst and flood the world with human suffering. And Richard Stone, he's just learned something. most people never figure out. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone has debts they can't pay, secrets they can't share, or fears that keep them awake in the dark hours before dawn. Friday, June 7th, 2002, 2:15 p.m. Dr. Sarah Chen has been studying earthquakes for 15 years, but the seismic readings flooding through her Caltech laboratory make her blood run cold as winter rain. Deep beneath the San Andreas Fault, something wicked is building pressure. Her instruments scattered across Southern California are detecting microtremors following the exact same deadly pattern she witnessed once before, right before the Northridge earthquake that snuffed out 57 lives and obliterated $20 billion worth of everything people held dear. She's frantically typing her preliminary warning report when Dr. James Morrison, her department supervisor, walks into her lab wearing the kind of expression that delivers life-destroying news. "Sarah, we need to have a serious conversation." What follows will haunt her nightmares for years to come. The university is slashing earthquake research funding like a butcher cutting meat. Her position is getting the axe. After 15 years of dedicated service, Dr. Sarah Chen is being tossed into the street like yesterday's garbage. "Budget constraints," Morrison explains, avoiding her eyes like a guilty child caught stealing. "Nothing personal, you understand." But Sarah understands perfectly. She's watched younger, less experienced researchers climb the academic ladder, while she got pushed aside like unwanted furniture. She knows that at 43, finding another research position is about as likely as predicting the exact second an earthquake will strike. That evening, while she's boxing up her life's work like a woman packing her own coffin, the phone rings with timing so perfect, it feels orchestrated by fate itself. "Dr. Chen, Richard Stone here. I run a humanitarian organization called Emergency Response International. I believe we should meet immediately." The restaurant Richard selects costs more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget, but he insists on paying while treating her like visiting royalty. "I've been following your earthquake research for years," Richard says over wine that probably costs more than her car payment. "Your prediction models are absolutely brilliant. Criminal that the university doesn't recognize pure genius when it's staring them right in the face." Sarah pushes expensive food around her plate, too emotionally shattered to have any appetite. "Well, they don't recognize it anymore. Gave me the boot this afternoon." "I know exactly what happened," Richard says quietly, his words carrying strange weight. "That's precisely why I called you tonight." Something in his tone makes Sarah look up from her untouched meal. Richard's watching her with the focused intensity of a hawk studying a field mouse. "How could you possibly know I got fired?" The decision was only made this morning. Richard's smile doesn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "I make it my business to know when extraordinary talent becomes available. Dr. Chen, I'd like to offer you a position with my organization that will change your life forever." The offer makes Sarah's head spin like a carousel. Twice her university salary, comprehensive benefits, and a research budget that makes her former funding look like pocket change. All she has to do is continue her earthquake research and share her findings with Richard's team. "For disaster preparedness," Richard explains like he's offering to save the world. "Early warning systems that get emergency aid to devastated communities before the ground stops shaking, instead of showing up a week later with useless condolences and medical band-aids." It sounds noble, sounds legitimate. But something about Richard Stone sets off alarm bells louder than a 5-alarm fire in her scientist's brain. "Why me specifically?" she asks. "There are dozens of seismologists with fancier degrees and bigger reputations." "Because you're the only one who's been consistently right," Richard replies, like he's stating mathematical facts. "Your models have predicted 3 of the last 4 major California earthquakes with pinpoint accuracy. The only reason the world doesn't know your name is because your university buried your reports deeper than earthquake epicenters. He's absolutely right, and Sarah knows it with sickening certainty. Her predictions have been devastatingly accurate, but her supervisors consistently ignored or suppressed her findings. Too controversial, they claimed. Too frightening for public consumption. Richard slides a contract across the white tablecloth. The salary figure makes Sarah's eyes widen like saucers. What Sarah doesn't know, what she can't possibly know, is that Richard Stone orchestrated her firing like a master chess player. He made a massive donation to Caltech's endowment fund with one tiny condition: eliminate Dr. Sarah Chen's position. And now he's about to use her earthquake predictions to build an empire on other people's suffering. Thursday, September 26th, 2002. 6:23 a.m. Hurricane Isidore barrels toward Louisiana like the wrath of God himself. But Richard Stone's convoy is already rolling into New Orleans, a full 12 hours before the storm makes landfall. To anyone watching the breathless news coverage, it looks like a miracle of humanitarian preparation and dedication. What the cameras don't show is Richard's 48 supply trucks waiting in Mississippi for 3 days, positioned like military assets based on Dr. Marcus Webb's classified weather intelligence. What the reporters also don't mention is that every truck carries something besides emergency supplies, contracts written in language so twisted and complex that desperate hurricane victims don't understand they're signing away their souls. Richard stands atop his mobile command center, like a general surveying a battlefield, watching storm clouds gather like an approaching army of destruction. Everything he's built over 18 months, his network of corrupted officials, his carefully recruited experts, his cultivated media relationships, is about to pay dividends in spectacular, bloody fashion. Sir? Jennifer Martinez approaches with a clipboard thick with deployment orders. All teams positioned and ready for action. CNN and FOX are requesting exclusive interviews. Tell them I'll speak after we've saved some lives, Richard replies with practiced, humble authority. Real heroes don't waste precious time on interviews while innocent people are suffering and dying. It's the perfect soundbite, and Jennifer makes mental notes to ensure it reaches exactly the right journalists at exactly the right moment. Hurricane Isidore slams into Louisiana at 6:47 p.m., with winds howling at 105 miles per hour, like banshees from hell. Not quite the complete catastrophe Richard secretly hoped for, but devastating enough to create the chaos and desperation his operation requires to function. Within hours, Emergency Response International becomes every news network's darling story. Social media explodes with praise for the miraculous organization that somehow achieved perfect timing and positioning. But inside Richard's temporary shelters, a very different story unfolds like a nightmare in slow motion. Maria Gonzalez lost everything when Isidore's storm surge swept through her lower 9th Ward neighborhood like a liquid bulldozer of destruction. She arrives at the emergency response shelter carrying her 2 terrified children, grateful for any help she can possibly find. The volunteer greeting her radiates genuine warmth and caring. The hot food smells like heaven itself. The clean beds look like salvation after hours of hell. But before Maria can access any of these life-saving services, she must sign paperwork. Just standard liability forms, the volunteer explains with a reassuring smile, bright as sunshine. Protects both you and our organization from any legal complications. Maria can barely read English on her best days, and these forms are written in dense legal language that would confuse a Harvard law professor. But her children are starving and terrified, and she has absolutely nowhere else in the world to turn. She signs every page without reading a single word. What Maria has actually signed is a disaster recovery partnership agreement that gives Emergency Response international legal rights to claim her property for emergency reconstruction purposes. She's also committed to working 40 hours weekly in community service for the organization in exchange for continued shelter and food. Maria Gonzalez has just become Richard Stone's first official slave. By the end of the week, 247 hurricane victims have signed identical agreements. They believe they're receiving temporary assistance while rebuilding their shattered lives. In reality, they've signed away their property rights and committed themselves to unpaid labor for an organization about to become extraordinarily wealthy from their misery and desperation. But Hurricane Isidore was just Richard's opening act, a rehearsal for something much bigger and more devastating. His network of corrupted officials is about to provide intelligence about a disaster that will make Isidore look like a gentle summer shower. Monday, February 17th, 2003. 11:15 a.m. The earthquake hits Northern California, like the Earth's crust splitting open to reveal hell itself, measuring 6.2 on the Richter scale, and turning the quiet town of Coalinga into a disaster zone. Dr. Sarah Chen's prediction models had been tracking dangerous seismic buildup for 2 solid weeks, and her panicked phone call to Richard Stone at 10:30 a.m. gave Emergency Response International a precious 77-minute head start on every other aid organization in America. By the time news helicopters arrive over the devastated town, Richard's teams are already treating injured survivors and setting up relief stations with military precision that seems almost supernatural. But this earthquake represents far more than another profit opportunity for Richard Stone. It's his chance to test a revolutionary new strategy, collecting entire communities instead of individual victims. Coalinga, population 11,668, has been effectively cut off from the civilized world, like an island of suffering. The earthquake damaged the main highway, knocked out all power and communications, and completely destroyed the water treatment plant. It's the perfect laboratory for Richard's next phase of expansion into something much darker and more ambitious. Within 48 hours, Emergency Response International has established itself as the only functioning authority in Coalinga. They control all medical care, all food distribution, all temporary shelter, and all communication with the outside world, making them the absolute masters of everyone's survival. And every single person wanting access to these life-saving services must sign Richard's contracts. "We're here to help you rebuild stronger and better than before," Richard tells the assembled townspeople, packed into the damaged high school gymnasium that now serves as his temporary headquarters. But true rebuilding requires cooperation, commitment, everyone working together toward our common goals of recovery and renewal. The townspeople, many having lost their homes and businesses in seconds of geological violence, listen with the desperate attention of people drowning in deep water. Richard Stone offers food when they're starving, medical care when they're bleeding, shelter when they have nowhere to sleep under the stars. The Coalinga Recovery Initiative will transform this tragic disaster into genuine opportunity. Richard continues with the practiced sincerity of a television evangelist. We'll build back better, stronger, more sustainable than ever before. But that kind of comprehensive rebuilding requires real sacrifices from everyone in our community. The contracts Richard's teams distribute are even more comprehensive and binding than the post-hurricane versions. Property owners signing over their earthquake-damaged buildings for reconstruction purposes will get to live in rebuilt homes, rent-free for 5 glorious years. Unemployed residents committing to work for the organization will receive food, shelter, and basic medical care for their entire families. It sounds generous beyond belief. Sounds like salvation wrapped in humanitarian ribbon and delivered by angels. But buried deep in the microscopic fine print lies a very different truth that would terrify anyone who could actually understand it. The 5-year rent-free period includes mandatory community service requirements amounting to full-time unpaid labor 7 days a week. Property ownership transfers are completely permanent, not temporary. Anyone attempting to leave the program forfeits all benefits immediately and faces crushing lawsuits for the total cost of their emergency care. Within 2 weeks of the earthquake, Richard Stone legally owns 78% of all real estate in Coalinga, California, and employs 62% of the remaining population as unpaid workers in his disaster recovery operation. That's really a modern plantation system. Media coverage becomes even more glowing and rapturous than after Hurricane Isidore. Celebrity donations flood in from across the country like a golden river. The entire world sees Richard Stone as a miracle worker who transforms tragedy into hope through pure force of will and humanitarian dedication. None of them realize they're funding a modern company town where workers have no rights, no wages, and absolutely no escape routes from their beautiful prison. But Richard's stunning success in Coalinga attracts dangerous attention from an unexpected source. Federal investigators who specialize in human trafficking are building a criminal case that could destroy everything Richard has worked to create. Friday, August 8th, 2003. 4:35 p.m. Agent Rebecca Torres sits in her Sacramento FBI office like a detective in a crime thriller, surrounded by wall-mounted photographs, financial records, and organizational charts that tell the story of the most sophisticated disaster profiteering scheme she's encountered in 15 years of federal law enforcement. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source imaginable. David Park, Richard Stone's government contact at Homeland Security, who walked into the FBI's Washington field office 3 days ago, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and a conscience he could no longer ignore. "My wife Linda died last month," Park had told federal agents, his voice hollow with grief and crushing guilt. "The experimental cancer treatment didn't work. Richard Stone stole $40,000 from me every month for 18 months, and Linda died anyway. I helped a monster, and I have to live with that forever." Park's meticulously kept records paint a devastating picture of Richard's criminal operation. Classified intelligence sold to private organizations, advance warnings about federal disaster declarations, insider information about aid allocations, all documented in careful detail, because Richard Stone never trusted anyone enough to operate without comprehensive insurance policies. But the financial records Park provided reveal an even more disturbing story that makes Rebecca's blood boil with righteous anger. Emergency Response International has collected $47 million in donations over just 2 years, but less than 12% actually went to legitimate disaster relief. The remainder vanished into real estate acquisitions, political contributions, and offshore accounts that Rebecca's forensic team is still desperately trying to trace through layers of criminal complexity. The human cost staggers belief and defies comprehension. Rebecca's investigation has identified 1,247 people across 6 states who signed Richard's contracts, and now live trapped in what can only be described as legalized modern slavery. They work without wages, live in company housing they can never own, and face crushing financial penalties for any attempt to escape their golden cages. "It's brilliant in the most twisted way imaginable," Rebecca tells her partner, Agent Mike Chen, while reviewing mountains of evidence that could fill a warehouse. He's created a completely legal framework for human trafficking that's disguised as humanitarian aid to the outside world. But building a prosecutable case against Richard Stone proves far more complicated than Rebecca initially anticipated. His victims are scattered across multiple states, many too frightened to speak openly about their situations. His celebrity supporters provide powerful political protection that reaches into the halls of Congress itself. And his network of corrupted officials extends deeper into the federal government than anyone initially realized or wanted to believe. The phone on Rebecca's desk rings like fate calling, interrupting her increasingly dark thoughts about justice and the American legal system. "Agent Torres? This is Dr. Sarah Chen. I believe you've been desperately trying to reach me for weeks." Rebecca's pulse quickens like a racehorse, hearing the starting gun. Dr. Chen has been completely impossible to contact, but she's potentially the most crucial witness in this entire, sprawling investigation. "Dr. Chen, yes, we absolutely must meet immediately. Are you somewhere safe right now?" A long, terrifying pause fills the phone line like a held breath. "I honestly don't know if anywhere is truly safe anymore, Agent Torres. I made a terrible mistake that I'll regret for the rest of my life. I helped Richard Stone predict disasters with scientific precision, and he's been using that information to exploit victims instead of helping them survive. We know about your situation. Can you meet with us? We can provide federal protection." "There's something else you need to know immediately," Dr. Chen continues, fear making her voice tight as a violin string. "Something catastrophically big is coming soon. My seismic models are showing underground activity that could trigger a massive earthquake in Southern California. And Richard Stone already knows every detail about when and where it will strike." Rebecca grabs her pen with trembling fingers. "When will it hit?" "Very soon. Maybe days, maybe weeks, but definitely soon. And when that earthquake hits, it's going to be absolutely catastrophic for millions of people. And Richard Stone will be perfectly positioned to profit from every ounce of human suffering it creates." The phone line goes completely dead, leaving Rebecca staring at the receiver in her shaking hand. Rebecca Torres now faces a terrifying race against time itself. Somewhere in Southern California, Richard Stone is preparing to orchestrate his biggest disaster profiteering scheme yet. And with 12 million innocent people living in the Los Angeles metropolitan area, the potential for human suffering defies imagination and threatens to dwarf everything Richard has done before. Tuesday, January 17th, 2005. 4:31 a.m. The Earth splits open like God's own wound at exactly 4:31 a.m., sending a devastating 7.1 magnitude earthquake tearing through the San Fernando Valley like nature's ultimate weapon of mass destruction. In just 20 seconds of pure geological violence, 57 people die, 8,700 are injured, and over 40,000 buildings crumble into rubble like children's blocks scattered by a giant's angry fist. Richard Stone has been wide awake for 3 hours, waiting for this moment, like a spider in its web. Dr. Sarah Chen's final report, delivered to his secure phone at 1:47 a.m., with tears in her voice, was precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Magnitude 7.0 or higher, epicenter near Northridge, maximum devastation concentrated in the San Fernando Valley. She'd begged him desperately to warn the authorities, to use this advance notice to save innocent lives, instead of positioning himself for maximum profit from human misery. Richard had thanked her politely for the information and hung up without a second thought. Now, as emergency sirens wail across Los Angeles, like the soundtrack to the apocalypse, and news networks scramble frantically to cover the unfolding devastation, Richard Stone's disaster machine swings into action with the terrifying efficiency of a military operation planned for months. Supply trucks, staged at 3 strategic locations since yesterday afternoon, begin rolling toward the worst-hit areas, like an invading army. His media team smoothly fields interview requests from desperate networks seeking expert commentary. Operations managers activate communication protocols that make Emergency Response International as the primary coordination hub for all private relief efforts across the entire disaster zone. But this earthquake represents infinitely more than Richard's biggest opportunity. It's his chance to collect and control an entire metropolitan area containing millions of potential victims. The scope of destruction creates opportunities that dwarf anything Richard has previously attempted in his criminal career. Entire neighborhoods lie completely flattened. Hundreds of thousands of people are suddenly homeless. The normal infrastructure of government and commerce has collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. In the chaos and confusion that follows the earthquake, Emergency Response International emerges like a shining beacon of hope and competence in a world gone mad. Richard's teams provide hot meals when all restaurants are closed, clean water when pipes are shattered, medical care when hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties, and temporary shelter when homes are uninhabitable piles of debris. Within 72 hours, Emergency Response has established 17 fully functional relief compounds throughout the disaster zone, each one a completely self-contained community, with its own power generation, water treatment facilities, medical centers, and communications systems that connect directly to Richard's command structure. And every single person entering those compounds, every desperate, grateful survivor, must sign Richard's contracts before receiving any assistance whatsoever. We're not providing temporary emergency relief like other organizations, Richard tells the assembled media outside his largest facility in Northridge, speaking with the calm authority of a man who has everything under perfect control. We're building sustainable communities that will serve as models for disaster resilience throughout the entire country and around the world. The contracts that earthquake victims sign in their desperation represent Richard's most sophisticated legal creation, yet documents that would make the devil himself proud of their elegant evil. Homeowners who lost their houses can transfer their property to Emergency Response in exchange for guaranteed housing, food, and medical care for their families. Small business owners can merge their operations with Richard's organization and become permanent employees in his rapidly expanding economic empire. The people signing these agreements believe with all their hearts that they're receiving temporary assistance while they rebuild their shattered lives. They have no idea they're permanently signing away their freedom to a man who views human suffering as his most profitable natural resource. Within 2 weeks of the earthquake, Richard Stone legally owns or controls over 3,000 properties throughout the Los Angeles area and employs 8,400 people in various forms of unpaid labor that generates millions in profit daily. His disaster relief operation has become the region's largest private employer, housing nearly 25,000 people in compounds that look like humanitarian aid centers, but function like minimum security prisons. Celebrity support overwhelms all previous efforts in scope and enthusiasm. Benefit concerts raise tens of millions of dollars. Hollywood's biggest stars personally deliver supplies to Richard's facilities and praise him on social media as a real-life superhero and the kind of leader America needs. The White House issues official statements commending Emergency Response International for their extraordinary humanitarian efforts in America's darkest hour. But Agent Rebecca Torres has been documenting every single move Richard makes, building an airtight case like a patient hunter stalking dangerous prey. The federal raid is scheduled for tomorrow morning. 127 agents from 6 different agencies are about to storm Richard's compounds simultaneously. But Richard Stone has one final secret weapon that could turn his greatest triumph into his ultimate downfall, or make him untouchable forever. Wednesday, February 4th, 2004, 5:45 a.m. Agent Rebecca Torres adjusts her bulletproof vest and checks her service weapon one final time, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Around her, 127 federal agents from 6 different agencies prepare for the largest coordinated raid in disaster relief investigation history. An operation that could finally bring down Richard Stone's empire of exploitation. They carry search warrants for 17 locations across Southern California and arrest warrants for Richard Stone and 43 members of his criminal organization. This is the moment Rebecca has worked toward for 3 years of painstaking investigation. Remember, Rebecca tells her team over crackling radio communications, we're dealing with potentially thousands of victims who may not realize they're victims. Some might actually resist our rescue attempts because they've been psychologically manipulated for months or years. Stay calm, stay professional, and remember, these people have been brainwashed by a master manipulator. But as the first wave of federal agents approaches the main emergency response compound in Northridge, they discover something that makes Rebecca's blood freeze solid in her veins like ice water. The compound stands completely, utterly empty. Not just empty of Richard Stone and his management team. Empty of every single human being. The 4,200 people who were living, working, and sleeping there just 3 days ago have vanished without a trace, as if they never existed at all. Torres, you need to see this immediately! Agent Mike Chen's voice crackles through her radio from inside the main administrative building. Rebecca finds him standing motionless in Richard's former office, staring at a wall covered with maps, photographs, and documents that reveal the true scope of the disaster empire they've been investigating, and it's far worse than their most pessimistic estimates. The maps show emergency response operations in 14 countries across 4 continents, connected by lines that look like a spider's web of global exploitation. The photographs show Richard meeting with government officials, military commanders, and business leaders worldwide, shaking hands and signing agreements that transform emergency response from a charity into something infinitely more sinister. The documents detail partnerships with multinational corporations, political organizations, and private military contractors that have transformed Richard's operation into a shadow government with resources that rival small nations. He's been building this criminal empire for years, Rebecca says, studying an organizational chart that shows Emergency Response International as the umbrella corporation controlling over 60 subsidiary companies spread across the globe. This isn't just disaster profiteering. This is a multinational criminal enterprise that makes the mafia look like amateur pickpockets. But the most disturbing discovery comes when they examine the residential areas of the compound. The living quarters are designed exactly like a maximum security prison facility. Electronic locks on every door, surveillance cameras in every room, walls topped with razor wire that's been cleverly disguised to look decorative from the outside world. The people living here weren't just exploited workers earning substandard wages. They were prisoners in a beautiful jail they couldn't see. Where did they all go? Agent Chen asks, examining a dining hall that still has food on the tables and coffee in the cups, as if everyone had simply vanished in the middle of breakfast, like victims of some supernatural rapture. Rebecca's answer comes through her radio like a death sentence. Agent Torres, we have reports of multiple private aircraft departing various Los Angeles airports over the past 48 hours. Passenger manifests show individuals matching the names and descriptions of people who were supposed to be living in the compounds. The realization hits Rebecca like a physical blow to her solar plexus, knocking the breath from her lungs. Richard Stone didn't just flee the country when he learned about the FBI investigation through his network of corrupted government sources. He took all of his victims with him to destinations unknown, probably never to be seen again. Over the next 3 hours, as federal agents search all 17 compounds with increasing desperation, the same horrifying pattern emerges everywhere. Empty buildings that echo with ghostly silence. Abandoned personal belongings that tell stories of interrupted lives, and absolutely no trace of the thousands of people who were living and working in Richard's facilities just days before the raid. Monday, September 5th, 2005, 6:30 p.m., New Orleans, Louisiana. Agent Rebecca Torres stands in the contaminated floodwater of New Orleans' lower 9th Ward, watching unmarked trucks load hurricane survivors who believe they're being rescued by humanitarian heroes. She knows the terrible truth. They're being processed into a system that will make them prisoners for the rest of their natural lives. Hurricane Katrina has devastated the Gulf Coast like the wrath of an angry god. But for Richard Stone, operating from shadows under a new identity with restructured organizations, it represents the perfect comeback opportunity to rebuild his empire of exploitation on an even grander scale. His His advanced warning systems worked with flawless precision, positioning resources days before the storm made landfall. His refined media strategy painted him as the humanitarian hero, stepping up when the federal government failed catastrophically. His legal contracts, perfected through years of practice and legal challenges, now trap victims so thoroughly and completely that escape is virtually impossible, even for those who recognize their situation. Emergency Response International is officially dead, destroyed by federal investigation and public exposure. But Richard Stone's empire lives on like a cancer under dozens of new names, new corporate faces, new legal structures specifically designed to avoid detection by law enforcement agencies still hunting for his previous incarnation. "How many victims this time?" asks Sarah Mitchell, the investigative journalist who spent the last 4 years documenting Richard's crimes, despite constant threats to her safety and multiple attempts on her life. "We've identified 47,000 people who've signed his latest contracts since Katrina made landfall 6 days ago," Rebecca replies, watching another truckload of unsuspecting victims disappear into Richard's processing system, like cattle heading to slaughter. But his global operations extend far beyond New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. Our latest intelligence estimates suggest he's collected over 300,000 victims from disasters worldwide over the past 5 years. The number hits both women like a punch to the gut from a professional boxer. 300,000 human beings, men, women, and children, who thought they were receiving life-saving humanitarian aid, but were actually being processed into the largest and most sophisticated human trafficking operation in modern history. "He's completely untouchable now, isn't he?" Sarah says, watching Richard Stone conduct another media interview in front of his relief stations, while surrounded by grateful survivors who have no idea what they've gotten themselves into. "All the evidence we've gathered, all the victim testimony, all the documentation of his crimes, none of it matters as long as he keeps playing the heroic savior on television screens around the world." Rebecca doesn't answer immediately, lost in dark thoughts about justice and the fundamental failure of the system she's devoted her life to serving. She spent 4 years building criminal cases against Richard Stone, only to watch him become more powerful, more dangerous, and more untouchable with each disaster he exploits for profit. But Rebecca also knows something that Sarah doesn't, something that gives her hope in the darkness. The International Task Force has finally identified several of Richard's new command centers through financial forensics and satellite surveillance. They've successfully mapped his updated global networks through years of patient intelligence gathering. Most importantly, they've managed to turn several of his key operatives into federal informants who are providing real-time intelligence about his operations. "Sarah," Rebecca says, watching another group of hurricane survivors sign their lives away to Richard Stone's latest incarnation. "Would you like to help us catch this monster once and for all?" The final confrontation between Richard Stone and the combined forces of international law enforcement is coming sooner than anyone expects. But Richard has spent years learning from his previous mistakes, building better defenses, creating more sophisticated operations, and establishing backup plans for his backup plans. The next time he surfaces for a major operation, it will be bigger, more devastating, and more profitable than anything he's attempted before in his criminal career. Because Richard Stone has learned the most important lesson of all, that in a world of constant natural disasters and human suffering, misery is the most renewable resource on the planet. And he's built a global empire specifically designed to harvest that suffering more efficiently than anyone thought humanly possible. The only question now is whether the good guys can stop him before he disappears again, taking hundreds of thousands more victims into the shadows of his global network that spans continents and corrupts governments. Present day, in a command center that could be anywhere in the world, Richard Stone watches satellite feeds of 3 different natural disasters unfolding simultaneously across 3 continents. His hair is grayer now, his face more weathered, but his eyes still burn with the same cold calculation that launched his empire of exploitation over 2 decades ago. On the main screen, wildfires consuming entire towns in Australia. On the secondary monitor, flooding devastating Bangladesh villages. On the third display, earthquake aftershocks rippling through central Turkey. Each disaster represents opportunity. Each tragedy means profit. Each human being in desperate need of help is another potential addition to his global workforce of the enslaved. "Sir," says his new operations coordinator, a former CIA analyst whose gambling debts made her just as controllable as Dr. Marcus Webb had been all those years ago. "We have positioning requests from all 3 theaters. Which operation takes priority?" Richard Stone smiles with the satisfaction of a man who has learned to play God with other people's lives. "All of them," he says simply. "We've grown beyond the limitations of choosing just one disaster at a time. Through shell companies and false identities, through corrupted officials and desperate experts, through celebrity endorsements and government partnerships, Richard Stone has built something that transcends anything the world has seen before. Not just a criminal organization, but a shadow system that feeds on human suffering and grows stronger with each passing catastrophe." His victims don't just work in hidden compounds anymore. They staff his legitimate businesses. They vote in elections according to his instructions. They occupy positions in governments and corporations and aid organizations around the globe. What started as disaster profiteering has evolved into something far more terrifying. A parallel civilization built entirely on exploitation. Agent Rebecca Torres is still hunting him. Sarah Mitchell is still exposing his crimes. Other investigators in other countries are still building cases against his various identities and organizations. But Richard Stone has learned the ultimate lesson that separates the successful predators from the failures. The house always wins when you own the entire game. Somewhere in the world right now, the ground is shaking. The winds are rising. The waters are flooding. And when desperate people cry out for help, Richard Stone will be there with a smile, a contract, and a promise of salvation that will damn them forever. Because in Richard Stone's world, every disaster is just another business opportunity. Every tragedy is just another harvest. And every human being who signs his contracts becomes another brick in an empire built on the simple truth that suffering never goes out of style. The tragedy Tycoon's empire continues to grow, one disaster at a time, one victim at a time, one signature at a time. And until someone stops him, it always will.